Hi, it's Fab Poli here. Welcome back to another episode of Biz Jet TV. And today we're going to be talking about an accident that happened, and we're going to sort of look at what happened and what could have been done to avoid the accident. But before we get into this, this is a Kingair accident that happened in October 2004 in Stewart, Virginia, in the mountains. Before we get into it, if you haven't subscribed to Biz Jet TV, I encourage you to subscribe to Biz Jet TV. This channel is all about private aviation and private jets. And so please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. And comment below. Any suggestions are more than welcome for other content that you may want us to cover. So let's get straight in here. It's Fab Poli here. Your host. Let's get into the accident here. I am an airline transport pilot with over 8,000 hours. I've flown all sorts of aircraft, from Cessna Citation to Falcon 900s to Boeing 737s, all the variants from the 300 all the way up to the 800 series. And I've got pilot's licenses from 4 different countries. So I'm here giving you this commentary on this accident. So this was a Super Kingair, which is a turboprop. It had 10 people on board, 2 pilots were flying and 8 people sitting in the back. The aircraft belonged to Hendrick Motorsport. They were flying into the airfield there in Stewart, Virginia. The weather wasn't too good. They got down to the minimum altitude, or the decision altitude as it's called, and they decided to execute a go-around or a missed approach, as it's also called. Now, the published missed approach actually says you need to start a turn straight away at the missed approach point and climb. What they did is they continued straight at 1,600. They actually descended to 1,600 feet, continued straight for 7.5 miles until they started the right turn. Now, they were surrounded by mountains, as you can see from the approach plate. And you see the blue line is the course that they actually flew. The red line is the one they should have been flying. So now the question is, well, why did the pilots make this mistake? How could they have made such a mistake? Well, let's just go back a bit. Now, one of the important things when you're flying, every approach, or every landing, there should be a briefing. And the briefing should be conducted up at cruising altitude, just before your descent. You would talk about when you're going to start your descent. You would then talk about the approach. And this briefing is conducted by the pilot flying. There's 2 pilots. One is the pilot flying, one is the pilot monitoring. The pilot flying does the flying, and the pilot monitoring does the radio and watches the navigation and backs up the other pilot if he's doing anything wrong. So that's why there's 2 pilots on board. So they split the workload. So what should have happened here is there should have been a briefing. I don't know if the briefing was done, how the briefing was done, but when you do the briefing, you talk about the approach, and when you talk about the approach, you look at the terrain surrounding the airport. In this case, they were going into mountainous terrain. You look at the type of approach. In this case, the approach was a localizer approach, which is a non-precision approach. There are 2 types of instrument approaches. There's a precision approach and a non-precision approach, and it's just very simple to explain it in layman terms. Let's take these 2 pens, okay? So this pen is giving you this indication, the left and right indication, okay? This pen is giving you up and down. So a precision approach will give you both, okay? So you have precisely where you are, and it will bring you all the way down to the runway. This is the precision approach, because it's giving you both. In the case of a localizer approach, what's happening is the airplane is going to be giving you just left and right, okay? So there's no vertical profile, basically. The vertical profile is something that the pilot needs to check himself. So you'll see the different altitudes, okay? You'll see the different distances. 2 miles, you've got to be at a certain altitude. So you'll sort of have to gauge that as you are descending to make sure that when you get to a certain point, okay, so if you get at 3 miles, you have to be at a certain altitude. You're at that altitude or slightly above that, you're not below. You have to look at the obstacles in that, and this is very, very important to do during the briefing. The other thing that's covered during the briefing is the type of landing you're going to do, what type of flap setting you're going to use, the speed for landing based off of the weight. That will have to be calculated and briefed. And the other thing you need to look at is if suddenly we get to our decision altitude and we have to go around or execute a missed approach, as some people like to call it, where are we going to go? Are we going to continue straight? We're going to go left? We're going to go right? And where we're going to fly to, and where we're going to fly altitude wise. Those 3 things need to be covered, and each approach has a missed approach procedure which needs to be followed. That's designed compared to the obstacles and whatnot. What these pilots did is they continued straight ahead, and then they started to do a right turn after 7.5 miles and crashed into mountains. Now bear in mind the visibility, the clouds was down to about 600 feet that day, so they basically couldn't see anything. It was just completely white. So they didn't even see the mountain they were going into. Bear in mind the instrumentation they had on board is not the modern instrumentation you have today, as you can see, where you can see the terrain. that would have probably helped them. This instrumentation is old instrumentation, but even with that old instrumentation, you know, and I've flown many hours with that kind of instrumentation, never had a problem. But again, you need to do your briefing. The briefing needs to be thorough, and one pilot briefs the other. If the other guy has any questions, or the guy that's giving the briefing has missed something out, they talk about it, so they have a clear plan in their head how that approach is going to be flown, and if they have to execute a missed approach for any reason, they know exactly how to do it, they know where the obstacles are, and they know how to stay away from the obstacles and keep everybody safe. So unfortunately, this was not done in this case. I mean, I don't know what the briefing was like. Unfortunately, there was no cockpit voice recorder on board, but it's certainly looking like the briefing was either not done or not done properly. And this, unfortunately, is one of the things that happens with private jets. There tends to be a bit of a rush culture, and they don't do their briefings, or they haven't been taught to do these things properly. This does happen a lot. So this is why I stress the fact that, you know, when you hire pilots, make sure it's a bit like you're buying a sports team. If you're buying a basketball team or a soccer team, you buy the team, you pay to hire some really good players, you pay them good money. You've got to train these guys. You've got to send them you've got to hire good guys and then train them and train them at a high level and give them lots and lots of training so they can keep you safe. This is so important. People go in, they buy a private aircraft, they try and cut corners, and when they cut corners, what they're really doing is they're cutting safety. And then they hire cheap pilots that don't do things properly, or they don't give them enough training, and then you get situations like this happen. So again, I've been stressing this all the way along. This is why I've decided to do this series of videos on accidents, just so we can look at the type of accident and explain it so that you, maybe who aren't a pilot, can understand what happened and sort of understand what can be done to prevent this kind of thing from happening. So again, if the briefing had been done thoroughly and the pilots had been talking to each other all the way down the approach, knowing exactly where they were and what they were supposed to be doing, this accident would have not happened. So that's all from me on this episode. If you haven't subscribed to Biz Jet TV, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Give us a thumbs up and comment below. Let us know what you think. Any suggestions you may have for another episode of Biz Jet TV, more than welcome. And that's all from Fab Poli at Biz Jet TV, and I'll see you on the next one.